good morning. We are in two passages of Scripture this morning. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15, of course, but also in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. And you're probably thinking, another passage out of the Old Testament where we have to go to the New Testament for a little help. Well, it's not my fault. The verses are so short in this Old Testament. Whoever wrote this didn't do the preacher any favors. And so we go to the New Testament as well. By the way, if you're wondering, this is my father-in-law over here. This is Captain Jim Trimble, and he's here visiting with us today. He's actually here to help us paint our home. And so, Jim, thank you for attending worship, but also the work that will happen afterwards. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. You shall not steal. See what I mean? Yeah. You shall not steal. Moses knew, God knew, they all knew, that if this ragtag group of runaway slaves were ever going to be a real community, they couldn't steal from one another. Jesus summed up these entire 10 commandments with a simple, memorable saying. Love God and love one another. And this part of the commandments, the latter part, we're all about that loving one another part. Love cannot exist where thieves thrive. And the penalty for stealing was pretty steep. Exodus chapter 22 spells it all out in agonizing detail. When someone steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, the thief shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. The thief shall make restitution. But if unable to do so, shall be sold for the theft. When the animal, whether ox or donkey or sheep, is found alive in the thief's possession, the thief shall pay double. Dr. Seuss would have had a field day in ancient Israel writing all these laws. 1 sheep, still sheep, repay 4 sheep. The bottom line of the law, though, was restitution. Double restitution if the stolen animal was found alive. 4-fold restitution if the animal was found dead. It's no wonder, then, why Zacchaeus responds to Jesus in the way that he did. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. There he was, sitting in that tree, a rather silly-looking little man, hoping that no one would spot him, hoping just to catch a glimpse at this radical rabbi. Traditionally, holy men wouldn't be caught dead mingling with a person like Zacchaeus. He was an outsider, a pariah. None of the other Jewish people even considered him part of the family anymore. Anyone who colluded with Rome over their own people were nothing less than a traitor. Father Abraham may have had many sons, but Zacchaeus wasn't one of them. That's how they all thought of all the sinners and tax collectors. But there was a rumor going around. There was a rumor that this rabbi, this Jesus fellow, was different. The word around the water cooler was that he welcomed sinners and was friendly with tax collectors. There was even a rumor that one of his inner circle, some guy named Matthew, used to be a tax collector. And, well, you see, all these rumors piqued Zacchaeus' curiosity. Could it really be so? He wondered. So he climbed into that leafy sycamore tree just to catch a glimpse, just to see who Jesus really was. And what he discovers is that Jesus already knows who he is. "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for it is necessary for me to lodge at your house." What did he say? Did he say he wants to stay at my house? I wonder if his heart did a little flutter. All those rumors playing over and over again in his head, were they more than just rumors? Because here I am, standing in front of the most important teacher, the most important prophet in over 4 centuries. And here we are in Jericho. It's a big city. There's a lot of people he could stay with, a lot of folks better than me. But he's asking to come to my house, to stay with me. Why me? It's because he doesn't know yet. Nobody really knew yet. Oh, certain people here and there were starting to suspect it. Peter may have started to suspect it, but nobody really quite understood. It was all just rumors. Only when it's all said and done do we finally get it. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And before Zacchaeus even knows it, it's right there in front of him. Grace. Grace. Before he even knows what to say, what to think, what to do, he's overwhelmed by grace. He's looking up. Zacchaeus? He knows his name. Come on down, Zacchaeus. He's calling him to come in front of the whole city. Come on down, because I want to come stay at your house with you. Grace. And what do you do when confronted by grace? What are you supposed to do when your heart is overwhelmed by unexpected grace? Can you remember back to that time when you first experienced and really understood grace? Barely out of her teen years, Angel Hoelscher Hatfield found herself unmarried, 5 months pregnant, and trying to hide it all from her pastor father. She writes about the night she finally confessed. My father's shoulders sagged and he hung his head. Momentarily we sat in silence, me holding my breath, awaiting his reaction while wearing the weight of his certain disappointment and possible anger. Then there was the indescribable and overwhelming feeling of shame that washed over me in waves. My father finally raised his head and looked at me with tears in his eyes. Honey, he said, I am so disappointed. I am. Now it was my turn to hang my head. And you have made poor choices which now have consequences, he continued. It won't be easy, and there will be struggles and a hard path ahead of you. But I love you. And now, I figure, I have been given more to love. Before I could respond, my father got up out of his chair and reached over and wrapped me in his arms and simply held me. It was just what I needed, she writes, and not anything I expected. What I had encountered was something I had never fully grasped before, though I had been taught for years. Grace. I didn't get what I deserved, but I certainly fully received what I had been taught. Grace swept over me, she says, and unleashed its power, connecting both my head and my heart. The only way I can describe it is that grace is the gift of a big exhale. That grace moment, and to me this is the most amazing part of what she writes, that grace moment propelled my life in a new direction. I confessed my sins, I cleaned up my act, and I charted a new course, fanned by the winds of grace and truth spoken in love. Before Zacchaeus even knows what's happening, he's overpowered by unexpected grace. But just like in Angel Hoelscher Hatfield's story, grace always demands a response. In the words of that master theologian, Augustine of Hippo, God's mercy goes before the unwilling to make him willing. It follows the willing to make his will effective. How does Zacchaeus respond? he responds to grace with grace. He responds to salvation with salvation. And there it is. Stealing is a salvation issue. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house." Because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15 is more than just about stealing an item that doesn't belong to you. It's more than just taking a piece of candy out of the convenience store when nobody's looking. It's more. One commentator states that theft, stealing, is an attack on the dignity of human beings and their work. Stealing is a very act against God's created order. Stealing places someone into bondage. Stealing from someone makes them a slave to fear of those who are supposed to be our neighbor in our community, a slave to insecurity and paranoia, a slave to isolation and loneliness. I can't trust anyone anymore. I can't be close to anyone anymore. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. Where there are bars on our windows, there are also bars on our hearts. Because love cannot exist where thieves thrive. Bill Watterson, the creator of my favorite comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes, does a whole series over thievery. When a thief breaks into the family's home, it produces this deep psychological effect on the entire family. In one comic strip, Calvin's father is lying awake in bed, unable to sleep. He thinks to himself, "This is going to be a long night." My heart jumps at the slightest sound. It's almost 2 and I'm wide awake. When someone breaks into your home, it shatters your last illusion of security. If you're not safe in your own home, you're not safe anywhere. And then his last thought is this. He thinks, a man's home is his castle, but it shouldn't have to be a fortress. And there is no doubt in my mind, no doubt in the Jewish people's mind, no doubt in Luke's mind, no doubt in Jesus's mind that Zacchaeus was guilty. Zacchaeus was guilty of stealing. He had stolen the people's freedom. He had stolen their salvation. Not a spiritual salvation. No, not a spiritual salvation. No one can steal that, but a physical salvation. They had no money. A mental salvation. They had no peace of mind. An emotional salvation. They had no hope for a future. Did Jesus come only to save our souls? I'm not sure Luke would agree, because in chapter 4 he places these words in Jesus' mouth. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. What Jesus was declaring was that this was the year of Jubilee. In the year of Jubilee, if you remember, it's that ancient Israelite social policy where all debt was forgiven, where all homes and land and farms went back to their original owners. All slaves were released from servitude. All of life, all of it, all the physical of life, it was completely reset. It was the year of Jubilee. Jesus' salvation, it's more than spiritual. It's physical too. It's psychological, it's emotional, it's all of it. Stealing is a salvation issue. We cannot live our lives by stealing someone else's. Love cannot exist where thieves thrive. But you know, sometimes the person a thief is really stealing from is not others. Often the person a thief is really stealing from is themselves. Zacchaeus knows it immediately. Here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. The grace of Jesus leads him to that ancient Israelite principle of restitution, to repentance, to change. Ultimately, it leads him to salvation. In this world, we find that there are grace robbers and then there are grace givers. It was exactly the dilemma of John Newton. Many of you saw the musical Amazing Grace this past April in Hoelscher Theater, so you may know the story already. John Newton, the composer of that legendary hymn, was once a captain on a slave trading ship. But after a brush with death on a stormy sea, the great blasphemer, as he called himself, ended his career in the slave trading industry and turned to Christ for salvation. Soon after, he became a minister and dedicated himself to campaigning against slavery at a time when no one else in the entire world was even questioning it. Newton did. He published Thoughts on the African Slave Trade in 1788, revealing his first-hand knowledge of the atrocity of slavery. He campaigned for the abolitionist movement. He even provided William Wilberforce, the English politician who would eventually end the slave trade industry in Great Britain, with the evidence necessary. The great grace robber turned grace giver, made possible by the great grave robber, Jesus Christ, who robbed Newton from the grave and turned him into a benefactor of grace and salvation. He did the same thing with Zacchaeus. He does the same thing for all of us. And why? Why? Why would he even want to associate with the sinners and the tax collectors of this world, the Newtons and the Zacchaeuses? It's because of what we already know. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. A thief not only steals salvation from others, a thief steals it from themselves. Jesus knows that it's true, so he comes to us with his grace, he comes to us with his mercy, because salvation is not possible to those who would rob others of salvation. Available? Yes, available always. And grace. Grace is exactly what's required for salvation for all. And so Jesus gives his mercy so that salvation may abound. Today, salvation has come to this house. I wonder, whose home will it come to next? Pray with me.